In episode 4, Lainey tracks down Josie at a local pool, and Josie is visibly annoyed. She feels like Lainey is stalking her. She has to remind her, I'm not here to see you, I'm here for the funeral of our aunt. And that's a sore subject for Lainey because she's annoyed that Susan made Josie the executor of the will when she was gone. She tells Josie, I think she did that so she would reassure that you had to come home at least once. The two start fighting with Josie trying to get away and Lainey grabbing at her and falling into the water where the two continue to fight. And while the two are fighting, Josie is having a flashback of when they were teenagers and she woke up with Lainey trying to smother her with a pillow. And Susan had to literally pull Lainey off of her. Neither of them want to drown, so they get out. And Josie just says aloud, when we're done with this funeral, I'm gone for good. The next day, though, at the school that Susan works at, they were having a tree planting ceremony in her name. And Josie is there, and up walks Lainey with her daughter. And once Josie sees her niece, she feels like she has to go over. She turns to Lainey and says, really? You brought your daughter? And Lainey says, whatever it takes. Lainey's daughter, who's probably 5, notices that Josie looks exactly like her mom, and she introduces herself as Ella Josephine. And Josie looks up at Lainey like, really? You named your kid after me? Don't get too excited though, Josie. It's a middle name. Once she straightens up, Lainey asks her, do you have any kids? Are you married? But Josie just says no. Josie starts having a flashback of when they were kids and Lainey beating the hell out of Warren. And she gets snapped out of it when Ella asks her, would you come over and have dinner at our house? So that night, Josie goes over, and she's actually having a really nice time bonding with her sister, her brother-in-law, and her niece. And when Ella has to go to the bathroom and Lainey goes to help her, Alex, Josie's brother-in-law, says, you know, Lainey really missed you. But when Ella comes back in and tells Josie, I wish you were there when I was born, it's just a lot of emotion for Josie, and she tries to get out of there. But Lainey goes after her. And Josie tells her sister, all I keep thinking about since I've arrived back here is you trying to smother me with a pillow and kill me. And Lainey immediately starts to try to apologize, saying, I know this makes no sense, but I was in a really weird state at that point. I was hurting all the time, and I needed you to feel the pain that I felt. I wasn't trying to kill you. I was trying to kill me. Which, yeah, by the way, makes no sense. Lainey says, don't worry, I'm in control of my life now. But Josie tells her, I think it's just best that once the funeral's over, we go our separate ways. We just enjoy the time we have together now. Alex walks in, though, and interrupts the conversation because he tells both of them that Erin, their mother, has been arrested for breaking and entering. So Lainey makes her mom wait until the morning, going and bailing her out, and immediately the two start fighting. Erin asks her, did you get in touch with Josie? And Lainey lies, saying, no, I didn't. Just putting her mom in a car and telling her, hey, try not to get arrested before the funeral. And the next day is the day of the funeral. Lainey gets up there, gives a great eulogy, sits down in between Alex and Josie turns to her and says, that was perfect. Lainey turns to her and says, I just want to let you know I'm really happy you're here, even if you don't stay. But then the church doors fly open and in walks a very drunk Erin. Alex tries to get up and stop her, but she screams at him, no, I deserve to grieve too. And she gets up in front of everybody ready to give a eulogy, even after Josie tells her, you're just embarrassing yourself at this point. Erin doesn't care, though, because she's drunk, and she starts to go in on her sister, but that's when Josie stands up. And Josie wasn't planning on saying anything, but she feels like she needs to break up the extreme awkwardness in the room. So she walks up to the casket and starts singing a song, and once she's finished, she stands in the middle of the aisle, extends her hand to Lainey. Lainey comes out, and the two sisters walk out of the church hand in hand. Now, over in San Quentin, Warren goes to that program that he gets to bond with the dog, and he walks up to the guy that was taking care of the dog that Warren's close with, Jack the dog, and he asks him, do you know who did this to me? And the inmate says, no, but I'll keep my ears open. For a price, though. It's hard to listen without being noticed. So Warren says okay. But later in the day, as he's being escorted back to his cell by a CO, the CO tells him, actually, hold on a second. Just walk in this cell. And that's when the leader of the Aryan Brotherhood walks in. He found out that Warren was poking around, shanked him, and he is pissed off. He feels like Warren was totally out of line for doing that, saying, you deserve answers, but you don't just start walking around demanding people start listening for you. And he makes it abundantly clear to Warren that he doesn't really care about Warren's safety. He cares more about his business. Because if Warren ends up getting retribution on this guy, then that could cause a lockdown, which locks down his business. He tells him whoever did this will be dealt with, but you're to stand down. And that night, as Warren is eating with the rest of the Aryan Brotherhood, they're kind of giving him shit for the podcast. He gives it to him back. But then he notices the guy in the cell next to him gets up to clear his plate, so Warren gets up. And the cellie next to him tells him, hey, the Mexicans were talking about you, and I took Spanish. I heard every word they were saying. And that's when he tells Warren that the guy who shanked him was the guy who was taking care of Jack the dog. So Warren waits until the next time that they have that program, and he asks the guy, hey, something's up with Jack. Come here, let me show you. And when the guy gets low, Warren grabs him by the balls, saying, "I know you did it." And the guy tells Warren that he was hired to do it by Owen Cave because this guy's girlfriend had gotten busted for possession and they were threatening to take his son away, and Owen made it all go away if he would shank Warren. So Warren lets him go, but he's in absolute disbelief that his father actually hired a fellow inmate to kill him. He then signals to Jack the dog to attack the guy, and Jack does. And as Warren eventually pulls the dog off, he mean mugs the shit out of this guy. And finally, with Poppy. She goes to visit her uncle, who's on her mother's side, and he lives in a homeless shelter in San Francisco. She brings him some items, but asks him, "Do you want to go visit Mom's grave?" And he kind of chuckles to himself, saying, "You always did this when you were a kid, too. Anytime you had problems with Shreve, you would go run to Mom." And she can't believe that he's already heard about this. So he says, "Well, what are you going to do about it?" And Poppy says, "Well, what is he going to do about it?" And her uncle says, "He's going to do nothing. Because when your dad looks at you, he just sees all the mistakes he made." Poppy doesn't really buy that, but her uncle reminds her that Shreve went to prison a week after Poppy's mom died, and he's always been beating himself up over that. It's food for thought for Poppy, but she gets back to the studio because she has to record her latest episode, where she gives out all the information she discovered on Owen Cave. The biggest being that there was a large gap in between the first domestic disturbance call and the second. And after recording the episode, she realizes that she needs to find those two witnesses that called that night. She FaceTimes Marcus, and Marcus tells her, this doesn't mean that Owen's guilty. I mean, cops do stuff on patrol all the time. But even Marcus knows it's kind of fishy. So she asks him, "Well, will you come with me to talk to some of these victims? It would help having a former cop there. Kind of give me a little credence." And Marcus says, "Yeah, I'll pick you up tonight." And as the two are heading over to talk to the one witness, Poppy gets a phone call from Desiree, but she rejects the phone call and Marcus notices. He says, "What, you guys are beefing now?" But Poppy doesn't want to talk about it. And Marcus thinks that this is just typical Poppy. If she doesn't see it, it's not there. And he fills her in on what it was like for him when the two broke up. Poppy fled to New York, but he was still there, seeing the family every day. This conversation, though, eventually melds into Marcus's current situation with his ex-wife and daughter. His daughter is smart, wants to go touring colleges, but his ex-wife won't allow him to go. And he's really upset by it, and he doesn't really want to fight with his ex, but Poppy reminds him, "Your daughter is always worth fighting for." They then arrive at the location of the first witness, and they pull out Owen Cave's photo and say, "Was this a man who came to your house that night?" She says, "Yeah, but he wasn't wearing a police uniform. And he wasn't there long. He was there for maybe 2 minutes tops until he got a phone call, seemed really annoyed by it, grabbed his partner, and left." And that is very, very alarming. And Poppy's pretty sure she knows who was on the other end of that phone call. So the next day, she goes to visit Melanie and asks her, "Did you and Owen fight that night?" But Melanie says no. Poppy fills her in on the fact that Owen got a phone call that night, seemed annoyed. But Melanie says Owen Cave did not kill Chuck Berman. He wouldn't have ruined our family like that. But then Melanie coughs up a lot of blood, and Poppy decides to take her to the hospital. And as Poppy is sitting there with Melanie passed out in the bed, she starts to have flashbacks of her own situation with her mother when her mom was dying when she was a little kid. A nurse eventually walks in, administers some drugs, and tells Poppy Melanie's going to be out of it for a little bit. So Poppy sees this as a good opportunity to possibly get the truth. She once again asks Melanie about the fight, saying it would have been completely understandable if you guys were fighting. So tell me, were you on the other end of that call? And Melanie admits, "Yes, I was. I called up Owen that night to tell him that I was leaving him. And when Owen found out, Owen was furious." So Poppy has talked to the one witness, she's talked to Melanie, but she is yet to talk to the other witness. And the second witness's call was an hour and 15 minutes after the first. But that woman has seemingly disappeared. Poppy asks Noah to track her down, but all public records of her are missing. And Poppy figures that this is a situation of a woman changing her identity because of an abusive relationship. Now, name changes would be public record unless the person changing the name requests that it's not. And Poppy thinks that that's what's going on here. Poppy thinks that Marcus might be able to pull some strings and find out where this woman went. And the next day, Marcus is able to pull those strings and find out where the woman currently lives. So Poppy goes over there and interviews both the woman and her daughter, who's older now. And the woman confirms that Owen Cave came to her house that night. He seemed nice and wanted to help, but he also seemed agitated at times, sweating profusely. But the most memorable thing happened the next day when the woman saw red blotches all over her carpet, and when she got down to clean them, she realized that they were blood. And both her and her daughter remember this because it was so bad they had to get new carpets. So Owen Cave arrived at their house with blood on his shoes and tracked it into their house. And present day Owen Cave is just as agitated as he was back in 1999. He's doing some yard work and gets a phone call and just starts saying, "What? When?" And you have to assume the person on the other end said, "Well, do you want me to do anything about it?" Because Owen responds to the person, "Yeah, I want you to go back in time and do it right this time." Owen also realizes, though, that his perception amongst his peers is probably in the toilet with this podcast going out. And he walks up to one fellow officer and tells her, You know, everything on that podcast is just speculation and lies. But you can kind of tell by her reaction that she definitely thinks differently of Owen, but she can't say it because he's a commanding officer. And then Owen gets an email from Poppy telling him, I know you tracked blood into somebody's house the same night Chuck was killed. We need to talk. And it puts the fear of God into Owen. And even Marcus, who was a pretty staunch defender of Owen, says, yeah, he's looking guiltier by the day. I mean, when I was Oakland PD, I never tracked blood into anyone's house. Marcus then, though, pressures Poppy into telling him what the beef is between Poppy and her family. And through this conversation, Poppy realized that she needs to try to be the bigger person and go make it right. So she heads to the bar, walks in, and sees Saidi. And Saidi doesn't want to talk to Poppy, but that doesn't stop Poppy from talking to Saidi, apologizing, telling her, I'm sorry for everything that happened. That was never my intent. I'm sorry you had to go through that. But as she's apologizing, both Saidi and Shreve start nitpicking the apology. Because Saidi's not here to hear an apology, she's here to fight with her older sister. Poppy, however, just wants to fix it, but eventually she realizes that Saidi's probably a lost cause with that. So she decides to turn to her dad, saying, I know you're mad at me, and you can have that, but I need you to know that I'm mad at you too, because my father would have never done to me what you did to me the other day. Thanks for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to this channel. Like the video if you liked it. Hit thumbs down if you don't. Be nice in the comments section. Nasty comments hurt my feelings. I work hard on these. If I make a mistake, it happens. If you don't see the next video up in the end screen, it'll be up soon. Sharing is caring. Put it on your MySpace page or your away message. And check out my podcast, Scene Invaders, wherever you listen to podcasts.